G'day, I'm Simon Barthold from Barthold Biomechanics, www.bartholdbiomechanics.com, and this is Langer UK TV. We've been spending the day talking about sports injuries. We've talked a little bit about orthotic devices and the differences between an over-the-counter orthotic, or a prefab if you like, versus a prescription orthotic device. And now it's the time of day where we need to talk about athletic footwear. This is a really important topic, and I guess for the athlete, they don't have to spend a lot of money. They've only got to buy a pair of running shorts and a pair of running shoes, and that's pretty much it. So the decisions they make in terms of footwear are incredibly important. Now, my goal here in this little segment is to give you a few ideas on what footwear might offer you, some of the trends that are swirling around us at the moment, and how to help your athlete make a decision. I suppose when we look at the basic function or the basic structure of a shoe, it's really quite simple. We've got an upper, we've got a midsole, and we've got an outsole, and every shoe is built the same way. The upper is built around what's called a last, which is these days a plastic model of I guess, an hypothetical foot. So it's molded around that, and then it's lasted. So in other words, it's wrapped around and it's stitched at the bottom, and that's the basis for the shoe. Now, every single running company has different lasts. They have different lasts for different models, and some companies have different lasts for men and women. I believe every company should have different lasts for men and women, because men and women's feet are different, and it's really, really important from fit and function that you recognise that difference. We won't dwell on that for the moment. So each component of the shoe has its own role to play. The upper, I think, is primarily responsible for the fit of the shoe. The fit, I guess, at times is trivialized. I think the fit of a shoe is incredibly important, because if the shoe doesn't fit properly, it won't work properly. There's some very interesting research right now that looks at subjective comfort versus injury. So in other words, just a simple survey saying, is the shoe comfortable or is it not, and how does that relate to injury? This is quite famous work now done by a very famous man called Professor Benno Nig from the University of Calgary, and he's actually been able to establish that there is a very strong correlation between comfort of the shoe, subjective comfort of the shoe, and the risk of injury. So very interesting. It means the upper is pretty important. Uppers are made of all sorts of different materials. This particular one is interesting. This is Brooks Ghost 6, and this has a Gore-Tex upper. Gore-Tex is a fabric that has fantastic water repelling properties. So this is a shoe that hopefully will keep you a bit dry in wet weather. But every company has different materials. The upper is also really important because there's a fair bit of weight in the upper. Currently we are trying to build footwear that is as light as possible. We actually have a whole new category. It's called lightweight, and this whole new category has really only come to light in the last 18 months or so. But the upper is very important. So everything you see in this shoe, the little Brooks logo here, all of this stitching, all of the polyurethane parts of this shoe add weight to the shoe. And weight's the great enemy of the athlete. If I was asked the three most important design features of any shoe, I'd say it's lightweight, followed closely by lightweight, and lightweight immediately thereafter. It's the old fundamental rule of physics, F equals ma, force equals mass times acceleration. You've got a mass down the end of your leg that's being accelerated, so the greater the weight of the shoe, the greater the force. So weight is really important. So this is a shoe that's designed, I suppose, as a bit of a go-to shoe. It has a reasonably traditional outlook to the shoe. It's off a pretty significant drop, or gradient if you like. I believe this is a 12mm drop, which means that the differential between the height of the midsole under the forefoot and the rear foot is 12mm. I don't know exactly what it is for this shoe, but say for example it might be 24mm in the rear foot and it might be 12mm in the forefoot, giving us a differential of 12mm. So that gives us some idea. The lower the drop, the less midsole material, the less weight in the shoe. This is a reasonably weighty shoe, pretty much of the average for this style of shoe, I would think. So the weight issues are really important. The midsole is interesting. The midsole materials are designed primarily to cushion the foot. So they are designed to try to attenuate the weight of strike. Most athletes, about 80% of all athletes, heel strike. So there's a lot of impact going through at heel strike. We want to try to make sure that we attenuate that as well as we can. This is another interesting shoe. This is the new product from Adidas. They have created a very specific midsole material called Boost, and you can actually see that this is a unique sort of, almost like a honeycomb sort of feature. The ASICS people are claiming this has an 800% better cushioning ability than normal EVA, and this has actually been verified outside the ASICS laboratory. The other thing that is very nice about this particular material is it's very, very light. Cushioning is important. You might read some blogs, people say that cushioning is not that important. I think it is important. I think it's also a vibrant area of research in footwear at the moment. But I think that because we're putting through such large loads when we run, if we can attenuate that to some degree, then that's going to be very important. The other thing that can be incorporated into midsoles is we can look at different densities. So you can see that in the Ghost we've got a different density on the medial side to the lateral side. The idea behind this is that if we've got a more dense material here, this is called a dual density midsole, the idea is that it's going to provide a little bit more of a stable platform as you strike and the shoe rolls down. Okay. In the past this was called pronation control. I want you to completely delete that term from your brain. A shoe can't control pronation, a shoe can't control motion. What it might be able to do is slow some events down a bit, but the whole idea behind dual density midsoles, which I have to admit I'm not a huge fan of, is that they basically add a little bit of consistency to the overall structure of the midsole outsole unit, and they perhaps might provide a bit more of a stable platform for the athlete to function from. But other than that, I think that they add weight, and for me, I'd rather see dual density midsoles disappear from shoe design. The outsole, you can see the purpose of the outsole really is pretty clear. It is the unit that provides grip. It's also very important for flexibility. You can see here that we've got flex grooves that are built into the shoe. The first flex groove is going to be around the region of the first metatarsal head, because that's where the primary bending of the foot occurs. So the shoe has to be allowed to bend at this point. Okay. There are then progressive flex grooves that are built into the shoe as you move forward that are recognising things like the interphalangeal joints, where also we get a lot of bending occurring in the foot. So grip, flexibility. The other thing with the outsole is obviously wear. Every athlete wants to get as many miles out of their shoe as they possibly can because they're paying $200 or $300 for a shoe. The sad fact is that shoes probably start to significantly lose their ability to attenuate shock at around about 600 kilometres. And they're probably completely shot by about 1,000 kilometres. So that's about when you need to start thinking about changing them over. So they unfortunately don't last that long, and some of the more modern ones with more modern materials last less than they did a while ago. Okay, so we've talked about some of the coming trends here. We've talked about midsole materials. I want to discuss a couple of the major running trends that have hit us in the last 4 or 5 years. Minimalism is the first one I want to talk about. That simply means that we're talking about shoes that are basically barely there, the so-called barefoot shoes, which is a bit of an oxymoron. I don't like to use that term. But these are shoes that are glove-like. They have no essential midsole. They are on often a zero drop, which means there's no gradient between heel and forefoot, and they offer minimal protection. They're extremely light, they're extremely flexible, and a lot of them have been derived from other sports like water sports, especially kayaking, etc. Now, there's a book written a few years ago called Born to Run that really started a lot of interest in barefoot running and in minimalist footwear. I have no issue at all with people experimenting with these particular trends, but I do need them to understand that they need to work at this, that you simply cannot go from a shoe like this to a minimalist shoe without expecting some pretty major issues. We've anecdotally seen quite serious injuries like stress fractures, and in particular calcaneal stress fractures, in people who decide that they want to go from traditional footwear to minimalist or barefoot, and they simply haven't allowed the tissues to precondition, and as a result they've had an injury. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't be thinking about it if you want to experiment with it. It just means that you do need to understand the risks involved. At the moment, I would say across the board, the evidence is not really there to recommend minimalism as a mainstream form of running shoe. I think the risks far outweigh the potential benefits. There's been a lot of research in this area in the last 2 or 3 years as interest has peaked. Not much of that research is conclusively showing any real benefit to minimalism. Having said that, I think that going to less structured footwear, even minimalist footwear, can give you a better understanding of running style flaws, things like overstriding, other issues that you might have with your running style. Some people call this form, but again, that's not a term I like. So if we can identify those flaws that occur in many runners, well, then that can be very, very beneficial. The other thing that more minimalist footwear can do is it can teach you to increase your cadence, in other words, the number of steps you take per minute, and it can also teach you to take a shorter step. Now, both of these things have pretty good evidence behind them to say that they are beneficial at a number of different levels and maybe even beneficial at a level of injury. So the bottom line with minimalism is we wouldn't discount it completely. We'd show great caution in recommending it. We'd let the athlete understand that they have to precondition the muscle in terms of strengthening and stretching, and that's particularly important in relation to the calf muscle, because when you go to a zero drop shoe, you're putting increased load through the calf muscle. There may be some benefit in terms of injury rehab or prevention. If you go to a more minimalist shoe, you do definitely change the stresses at the knee, but the human body, unfortunately, shifts stresses somewhere else if they're reduced. So if we reduce the stresses at the knee, it has to go somewhere else, and unfortunately goes to the ankle. So it increases the loading through the Achilles tendon, the calf and the ankle. So there's always a trade-off. The bottom line here is advice, advice, advice. Make sure your athlete understands the risk and benefit. The other trend that is much more recent is the polar opposite of minimalism, and that's maximalism, which is quite difficult to say. You may be aware of a product called Hoka. Hoka works off a 38mm platform. It's zero drop. In other words, it's 38mm in the forefoot. No, I beg your pardon, I think it's a 4mm drop. So it's 34 in the rear foot, 38 in the, sorry, I beg your pardon, 34 in the forefoot, 38 in the rear foot. So you're working on a very large platform. The extraordinary thing about this product is it's very, very light. So the company has actually managed to build foams that are very lightweight and offering a very, very high level of cushioning on a very large platform. The theory behind this is a couple of French developers designed the shoe, and they were very interested in the concept of sporting equipment that was oversized. So think tennis rackets with a very large sweet spot, think parabolic skis, which are very wide in the forefoot and very wide in the rear foot and narrow in the middle, and oversized bike wheels and tires for mountain biking. So they were very interested in that concept, and they thought, you know what, we think we can probably apply that to running footwear, and we can especially apply it to people who are doing very high mileage. So this concept's gained some traction with ultramarathoners particularly, and now slowly but surely it's trickling down into people who are doing less mileage, and some people are finding benefit in that. Now, there is absolutely zero science behind this at this point in time. All the discussion is anecdotal, but I'm not going to discount it at all. For the moment, I believe that for some people it may benefit. You know, the bottom line with all of this discussion is that there is no one rule that's going to apply to everybody. There is no one size fits all rule. It's a matter of trying to figure out for your individual athlete what their individual needs are, what their loading patterns are, and what might work for them with footwear, and you can then make an informed decision. The maximalist trend is building some momentum. A couple of other brands are currently experimenting with it. Brooks have just brought out a new shoe called the Transcend, which we'd probably regard as maximalist. New Balance also have some product, and a couple of other major companies are exploring this whole avenue of much larger, much thicker cushioned shoes. We'll see where it goes. Minimalism has really declined. People bought into the experiment. They weren't prepared to do the work that was required to perhaps gain a benefit from it. They got injured, and the sales of the shoe have really nosedived. Will we see that with maximalism? I think probably not, because I think I have no evidence for this comment, but I suspect that perhaps the threat of injury with maximalist product is much less than it was with minimalism, but time will tell. Okay, so that's a bit of a snapshot. We could talk about shoes all day. There are many different forms of shoes. We're just talking about running shoes. Be aware that shoes are sport specific, so it's very important to have the right shoe for the right sport. You don't want to be playing tennis in a running shoe, and you don't want to be running in a tennis shoe. It's that simple. It's a fascinating topic, area of great research. It's one of my great passions, and I hope you found this little segment interesting.